There have recently been a number of whistleblowers from British police forces, local police forces around the country, who have come out and said, look, the police were complicit with the grooming gangs. They knew, they have been a part of it, and in fact, we have police officers who have been arrested over historic involvement and themselves actively part of grooming gangs. So the idea that we can just be like, well, the police can police themselves on this, and Jess Phillips is like, okay, we'll just hand it off to the local branches, to the local organisations to deal with it. It's like, no, they'll be marking their own homework, and of course they will decide that, no, we did very little wrong. So, for example, this is from not long ago, actually, April, 2nd of April, where 3 police officers, former police officers now, have been arrested for historic being part of a grooming gang, historically. What's really weird is they go completely unnamed in all of the coverage of this. So in the BBC or, the Mirror or wherever, like, their names are just... And it's weird because they're all in their 50s and 60s. So it's not like they're...
My best guess at why they wouldn't be naming them is they're worried that they might be of a specific background that might reflect poorly on...
Well, I mean, they're literally being investigated for, quote, historic child exploitation in regards to the grooming gangs. So, yes.
I know it does happen with British people, but one would imagine that a British police officer that also stands to be held legally liable, there's enough self-interest alone in that sort of organisation where it at least strongly disincentivises it.
Yeah.
Whereas when it's another community, I can see it happening.
And the thing is, this is in Rotherham as well. So.
That's true, yeah.
Anyway,
they just become men.
Yes. So or not even men, just former South Yorkshire police officer. From this last one being arrested for raping a teenage girl in Rotherham in 2004. Oh, really? Interesting. Anyway, so the thing with these historic charges is that they often don't go anywhere, especially when they're against the police. A paradigm example of that is Halifax alleged grooming gang member Amjad Ditter, who himself, I don't know if there's a picture of him in here actually, but there's a picture of the next one. He was among 16 men charged. He was a police officer at the time. 16 men charged of being part of a grooming gang in Halifax. He was being prosecuted over sexual abuse between 2006 and 2009. And even though that's not exactly ancient history, it was dropped anyway, because for some reason they decided, quote, there's no realistic prospect of a conviction. He was charged in 2019. It went on for 5 years, and the Crown Prosecution Service just dropped it. They've decided that there's no realistic prospect of a conviction, so the case has just been dropped. So he's gotten away with it.
If you'd have asked me something like 2 years ago on the back of this sort of stuff, it's like, well, I'd say, well, it just all needs, reforming. But at this point, we're so past reform.
Root and stem,
just root and stem, gutting.
Yeah, and so the point being is that the local police forces in these areas were definitely complicit. I mean, several police officers have been arrested and charged and had their cases dropped because they just can't... I mean, to be fair, there probably is very little evidence they can actually draw on, so it is just accusatory. But I'm personally going to decide that I think they're probably guilty. Anyway, so... it's not surprising then that various reviews are finding, the police were very, very, very lax and weren't really interested in actually dealing with this problem. There was a review recently that covered from 2004 to 2013 by about Greater Manchester Police, and as the BBC tell us, it highlights apparent local authority indifference to the plight of hundreds of youngsters as victims of Asian men. Yeah, well, I guess that if the police are part of the victimisers, why would we want to investigate? This is our turf, bro. Andy Burnham, the Greater Manchester Mayor, has been the one good Labour Mayor on this, and he's come out and called for disciplinary action to be taken against police officers and councils who failed in their duties. Because, of course, no one's been punished for this. No one has lost their jobs. No one's gone to jail. It's crazy how they just end up dropping the charges and it goes no further.
I imagine that's one of the few things Burnham can actually do as the Mayor of Manchester.
I imagine it is. And like I said, he's been repeatedly raising this as well, so this is entirely to his credit. Again, Labour more right-wing than anyone else. Greater Manchester Police has apologised. Oh, guys, they've apologised.
Oh, well, we've got to say, it's all good now.
Just because a bunch of our police officers have been arrested for being part of child rape gangs, they say, quote, things are handled very differently now. So, well, there we go. They've learned their lesson. The review, they say, focused on 111 cases in Rochdale. and concluded that there was compelling evidence of widespread organised sexual exploitation of children. This should be a massive alarm bell, you'd think, but anyway, I guess if the police are in on it, maybe it's not. Statutory agencies failed to respond appropriately, the threat of CSE was not addressed, and the probability that at least 74 children were being exploited in 48 of those cases, where there were just serious failures to protect the child, and it was just low priority and under-resourced by the police. And it's like, it's not their problem.
Too busy telling people off for hate crimes on Facebook.
Yeah.
We've got to tell them off for their dangerous language whilst children are being groomed.
We're at the point now, aren't we, where basically all of the institutions in Britain are at the point where they would rather defend the worst scum of their people than the best and most virtuous of ours.
They would rather be rapists than racists.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to. It's a
A horrifying slogan, but it's true.
Posey Parker pointed this out on Twitter the other day. So look, they're really more worried about being called a racist than they are of being themselves a rapist. And it's like, okay, that's true. And it's absolutely crazy. And so, frankly, I just assume guilt in all of these cases. I assume the police are part of the grooming gangs now. Right? They're not just related to them. They're not just covering for them for political reasons. No, I'm going to assume because of the previous ones, you guys are part of the goddamn grooming gangs. And if you don't like that, maybe you should have been against the grooming gangs and punishing them. And it's too late now. My mind is made up.
I know that one or two, I think it was in Rochdale or one of the surrounding towns, where there were cases in one of the investigations where one or two of the police officers basically said this seems like a cover-up.
Yes.
And then apparently one of them was fired.
If it helps, we'll get to the cover-up in a minute.
Okay.
So, unsurprisingly, you get articles like this from 2018 where the police appear to punish the victims of the Newcastle grooming gangs. Review finds, why would the police be punishing the victims? And the answer is a combination of like political correctness, political corruption, and again, I'm just going to assume they were in on it. I'm going to assume you were just in on it. Why else would you be siding with a gang of rapists?
Blimey, that's like an infographic for the dangers of cousin marriage there, isn't it?
Yes.
That's horrifying.
But they say in The Guardian here, while perpetrators were not punished or disrupted, attempts to persuade victims to change behaviours and not return to the abusers led to consideration of deterrent punishments for victims for being drunk or disorderly or for making false allegations when accounts were changed. The report from the retired barrister David Spicer to the response by the authorities in Newcastle to child exploitation concluded that the victims received effective protection after January 2014. What happened in January 2014 was the Alexis J report in 2014 that came out. So I can't remember whether this is before or after the report was actually released. But the point is, after the Rotherham report that highlights the failure, suddenly like, oh, we'd better change the way we're acting, because otherwise there's going to be scrutiny. They might come down on us. And they say, of course, that before that, the force's actions had no impact on that consistency, because they just didn't care. So going back to Rotherham for a second, shall we? Isn't that weird, how the grooming gangs inquiry by the Independent Office of Police Conduct in what was Operation Linden, apparently they were just told, don't investigate the senior officers.
That's like saying, oh, please don't look under there. There's no crime being done there.
Yeah, which makes me just naturally assume that the senior officers were part of the rape gangs.
Guilty.
Yeah, they're guilty as far
That's
as...
the only reason they would be saying it, right?
Well,
Yes.
why else would you?
Yeah.
Like, it's impossible to understand the rationale if it wasn't to protect someone who is a rapist. Right. So anyway, let's quickly from the Times here. Independent investigators who examined police failings in the Rotherham grooming scandal were told not to investigate senior officers, and the inquiry, quote, barely scratched the surface, a whistleblower has claimed. No officers lost their jobs, and only those in the lower ranks were even investigated for misconduct. The Independent Office of Police Conduct carried out Operation Linden, which found that police did not make crime records even when rapes and sexual assaults were reported, did not question older men found in the presence of drunk girls, and viewed vulnerable children as troublesome problems instead of victims. Not new information, but I think this bit is the important bit. Quote, we were actively told not to pursue senior officers, the whistleblower said. It was just largely incompetent, or at least it seems incompetent on the surface, but I'm sorry, I don't believe in competence anymore. I believe malice. I think you're involved.
So it's worth mentioning as well that these sorts of things, in a normal functioning police force, as in functioning as it's intended, not necessarily functioning as I see it, police officers get brought into disciplinaries for things like describing their colleague in a jokey way as a bitch or something like that. I've heard about this from first-hand accounts where people are making jokes and they sort of bonding stuff, and someone overhears it, and then they get called into a disciplinary, yet their officers could be a rapist, and they're just saying, oh no, don't investigate them. When we know how petty the police are, this has to be a very deliberate.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, they say, quote, "We were told to focus on junior officers who handled the complaints from individual victims. But this was happening across the country where lower-ranked officers were just ignoring it." So, okay, great. So it's a systematic issue, basically. And I'm assuming, because they weren't investigated, that the senior officers were just completely complicit. There's no presumption of innocence for me when we're dealing with this now. I just assume if you're not actively rooting this stuff out from your forces, then you're part of it and you probably need to be investigated. Anyway, investigations, that's an interesting question, isn't it? So you would think there would be quite a large task force dedicated to dealing with the grooming gangs, given how perennial they have been in our towns and cities. There's something like 25 different towns and cities now that have had congenital grooming gang problems because of certain communities there. But overall, in the entire country, there are only 1,000 police officers who are trained by a dedicated task force to dealing with this that was set up 2 years ago. At the same time, they have 1,700 HR workers. That's the important thing. So this, and one of the repeated refrains that we hear from the whistleblowers and the investigations, this is just a really low priority for the police. They just don't think preventing children from being raped is important. And so, okay, well, fair enough.
Do with a values realignment, to borrow from the parlance of our times.
Yeah, you would think so.
Yes.
But
well,
also, sorry. No, go ahead.
No, just to say that, obviously everyone involved in it, who is not English, not British, should be deported after we've hanged them.
Oh, yeah.
We'll send the bodies back, as far as I'm...
Here.
But, I mean, at the very least, any of the people involved and convicted of being part of a grooming gang should just be deported. Rupert Lowe was like, look, their families can go too, because their families knew it was happening.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, yeah, I agree. Why do we want these people here? Why do we want these people?
Well, so, if a community covers up atrocities against the indigenous population, we're perfectly justified in saying you can't live here. At the very least.
Yeah, it's not
That's
even
the bare minimum.
It's not even like a hardline position. It's like, why would they not be deported? But anyway, the answer is because all of this is expressly political, and now this is going to become an expressly political issue too. Senior police officers fear that the government pressure to reinvestigate closed historic cases of grooming gang could make it harder to catch those targeting children today. Why? Why would it do that? What would be the concern? You'd be like, we've only got 1,000 officers doing it, I guess. It's like, okay, great.
It's not the mass rape. It's the perception of the mass rape that matters here.
Mm. It's obvious that they're trying to get people to not focus on it because it's a very weak point in the establishment's armour. Yeah. And by having it in the media constantly, it's making it an issue that's only going to get worse because they're not doing anything about it.
Yeah, but they want to make this expressly political. Because, I mean, they say here that police figures show that... Excuse me. Police figures show that only a fraction of child sexual abuse allegations, 0.6%, relate to grooming and abuse by male groups or gangs. It's like, yes, but if you've ignored them for literally decades, and as we saw in the previous ones, refused to even register it, did no investigation, or the bare minimum, then yeah, it's going to look like only 0.6% of it is. And then when, okay, you bust a grooming gang, 20 people go to jail. Okay, but these girls were raped by hundreds of different men. Hundreds and hundreds of different men for a period of years because they were literally pimped out and trafficked around the country. So we know there are now thousands and thousands. For each rape gang, there are thousands of child rapists just wandering free. And nobody cares? No, sorry, are we not? We're just going to let that go. Right, okay, sorry, I forgot. One police officer described it as, quote, knee-jerking. And another said that it was reacting to a, quote, right-wing driven political cause. Ah, yeah, right, okay, so not wanting children to be raped en masse is a right-wing driven political cause. You are right, you have us there. This is a very right-wing political cause, and we're going to win on it. Right?
Notice how they don't point out that any of the arguments are wrong. They're just saying...
Exactly.
Their arguments are politically motivated, as they say a politically motivated statement.
Yes. So their political motivation was pro-grooming gang. That's the left-wing centrist position. The right-wing position is anti-grooming gang. Absolutely correct. I'm more than happy to stand on that point. And they say, look, we're going to need more money. It's like, of course you're going to need more money. Anyway, moving on. Former police officers are coming out of the woodwork and saying, look, this is still going on. This is, again, from January this year. This is all still going on. nothing's really happening. There are only 1,000 police officers in the entire country dealing with this issue, and even then they seem to be disincentivized by the structures around them. Simon Morton, who led Operation Bullfinch for Thames Valley Police, told the BBC that individuals involved in grooming networks are still active and influencing others to carry out similar crimes. So the tens of thousands of child rapists who are involved with the grooming gangs, but not necessarily the ringleaders of the grooming gangs, are still active and out there raping children. Oh,
there's a massive elephant in the room here in that by the government talking about the issue, it being national news, for a while it was the only thing anyone was talking about, and then nothing happened.
Yes.
Well, that signals to the gang members, well, there's going to be no consequences for me then, because it's reached the highest pitch it could possibly reach, and nothing has happened.
Elon Musk started the year on an absolute just barbarian rampage on this subject, rightfully so. And yeah, crickets. Just what's going on? Nothing's changed.
Yeah, if the most powerful man in the world can't get the ball moving on this, then we can just do it with impunity forever. Nothing will get it moving in their eyes.
No, absolutely. And the police are just essentially covering up for us.
I would go so far as to say that it's tantamount to complicity.
I agree.
That all of the people in the political system that are working against this, people like Jess Phillips, for example,
Yes.
who's denied an inquiry.
Yes.
People like that, I think, when the time comes, people will remember, and that they should be held as some sort of accessory to the crimes.
Well, she's going to get great replaced at the next election.
That's
anyway,
true,
so
yeah.
Sorry, Jess, you did it to yourself. Anyway, so yeah, it's still ongoing. Again, don't take my word for it. Again, this is the guy who led was Operation Bullfinch, which is the Thames Valley Police's own investigation into this. Like, this is not me just making statements. These are me reading the people who are directly involved in all of this. And they say, there are other police sources that they've spoken to who say the same thing. And then you've got Maggie Oliver, again, another police whistleblower, who says that this is all still going and there's nothing being done. So Maggie Oliver has set up a foundation called the Stop Child Sexual Abuse Exploitation Foundation, and is running the #TheyKnew campaign, because they did know. Often they were part of the police and got arrested for it later, like 20 years later, and there's no justice being found for these survivors. She's looking to raise £125,000 towards the cost of investigating and bringing civil claims or private prosecutions against public officials who failed to stop. Now, you'd think this would be the government's job. Like, oh, sorry, did a bunch of the police around the country either were themselves complicit or just not care, not do their goddamn jobs, or you were being raped by a bunch of foreign men? Sorry, you're going to have to do that privately. And so, okay, good for her, don't get me wrong. And again, it's mad that it's come to this point. And another ex-policeman was like, well, yeah, the politicians and mosques who were around these grooming gangs in these towns were influencing the investigation, so they were protecting their own. One retired South Yorkshire police officer serving at the time of the Rotherham abuses alleges that the scale and seriousness of the crimes were downplayed because officers didn't want any flack from the councillors. Now, he doesn't say in which direction, right? He doesn't say in which direction and which councillors. So I guess we'll just have to leave that in the air for you to make assumptions of your own. And another one says, another retired police officer says that the local councillors allegedly helped cover up the sadistic grooming gangs abuses as Labour is accused of going soft on those who abuse their power. So the Labour councillors in Rotherham, Rochdale, wherever, South Yorkshire, were also complicit in this. The police, the councillors, and, like you say, the MPs who are given cover, they are all complicit. They all knew. They are never probably going to be brought to justice, just FYI. And Rupert Lowe is the one member, well, no, he's not a member of Reform, is he? So Nigel Farage, of course, promised a non-statutory independent inquiry. That's right, I can hear crickets too. That went nowhere. He decided instead to get Bangladeshi nationalists in his party for some reason. So Rupert Lowe is the person doing it. He has raised £600,000, which shows, from nearly 20,000 people, which shows that there is a deep interest, well of interest in having this done. Even though it won't have statutory powers, something useful probably will still come of this, even if nothing else, keeping it alive in the public imagination, because like the guy said earlier, it's still going on.
I think people should be shamed very publicly for what they've done here, as in the people who facilitated it as well as the actual perpetrators themselves. Something like this can do that, in that they say, this person did this and this facilitated the rape of X number of young girls.
Give the public names.
I think people should
names and numbers. Yeah.
I think you should be prosecuted.
Well,
for being complicit.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
but unfortunately, this can't do that, can it?
No, of course not. But yeah, lighting people up, as it were, is probably wise. But anyway, we'll leave that there.
If you would like to watch the full uncut version that is also uncensored, head on over to lotuseaters.com to find out more.